The ink on my closing documents was barely dry when my phone lit up with a text from my mom. "Call me when you're done with whatever you're doing. Family dinner Sunday. Mandatory." I stared at that word, mandatory, like I was still 17 and grounded for coming home past curfew. I was 31 years old, standing in the driveway of a house I had just purchased with money I had saved for 9 years, and my mother was summoning me to dinner, like I owed her an explanation for breathing. I didn't call her back that night. I sat on the floor of my empty living room. No furniture yet. Just me and a bottle of sparkling water I'd bought to celebrate. And I looked at the walls and thought, this is mine. Every square foot of it. The slightly crooked crown molding in the hallway. The kitchen window that stuck a little when you tried to open it past halfway. The backyard with the old oak tree that had probably been there longer than my entire family line. Mine. I should explain something about my family before I go any further, because none of what happened next will make sense without it. I'm the youngest of 3 kids. My oldest sibling is my brother, who lives in Portland and calls on holidays if he remembers. My middle sibling is my sister. She's 35, married to her husband, and they have 2 kids, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. They're a family of 4 living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the same town as my parents, 40 minutes from where I'd just bought my house. My sister has never held a job longer than 8 months. Her husband works in warehouse logistics and his incomes is fine, not lavish but enough. Except that they make decisions that consistently outrun their budget. A lease on a truck he didn't need. A Disney vacation they put on credit cards. Impulse renovations to an apartment they didn't own. My parents have been quietly subsidizing them for years. I only know the shape of it, not the exact numbers. But I know my dad co-signed a personal loan for them in 2021. And I know my parents paid 2 months of their back rent during the pandemic. Nobody ever asked me to contribute directly. They were just always talking about my sister's situation at every gathering. Always framing it as the family's problem to solve together. Always looking at me. The one with the stable job. The one who had never asked them for anything. The one who drove a 7-year-old Honda and packed lunches to work. With this particular kind of expectation in their eyes. I'm a project manager at a mid-size logistics company. I make good money. I also live like I make half of what I actually make, because I have been working toward a specific goal since I was 22 years old, and I was not going to let anything derail it. I wanted a house. Not a starter condo. Not a townhouse with an HOA that governed what color I could paint my front door. A house with a yard, a real kitchen, a room I could use as an office, something permanent, something that was unambiguously legally, financially mine. So I saved. I skipped vacations. I brought lunch to work. I drove the same car. I didn't tell anyone, because the moment you tell my family you have money, that money develops a gravitational pull toward everyone else's problems. I found a house in October. A 3-bedroom in a neighborhood just far enough from my parents to be my own life, but close enough that I wasn't abandoning them. It needed some cosmetic work, new paint, updated fixtures. The kitchen could use new appliances eventually. But structurally it was solid. My inspector said the bones were good and I trusted her. I made an offer. There was a counter. I came back with a better number. We closed in November. The only person who knew was my best friend from college. She came with me to the walkthrough and cried in the kitchen, which made me cry too, which was not the composed professional experience I had imagined, but was actually perfect. I had planned to tell my family at Thanksgiving. I was going to walk in with the keys and say, I bought a house. I had played out the scene in my head 100 times. My mom would be surprised. My dad would be proud. My sister would be happy for me. We would all eat too much and argue about football, and it would be a normal holiday. That's not what happened. What happened is that my cousin, my mom's sister's son, who works at a title company in the area, processed paperwork that came across his desk and recognized my name and my new address, and made a phone call he should not have made. I found out later that he called my mother the same afternoon I signed my closing documents. Before I had even left the building. Before I had opened that bottle of sparkling water on my living room floor, Sunday dinner was not what I expected. I walked in thinking it was a regular family dinner. My mom had made pot roast. which she only does for occasions, and I should have read that as a sign. My dad was sitting at the head of the table, with the look he gets when he's about to have a conversation he's been rehearsing. My sister and her husband were already there with both kids. Her youngest was running laps around the kitchen island. I sat down. My mom brought out the food. We were maybe 10 minutes into the meal when she set down her fork and folded her hands on the table and said, very calmly, "So, it was not a question." I put down my fork too. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly, like she was processing. "You didn't tell us." "I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet," I said. "It's a big decision. I wanted to make it on my own." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. My sister looked at her plate. Her husband looked at my dad. My dad looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Then my mother said, "Well, your sister's family needs a place to go. The landlord is selling the building and they have to be out by February. We think it makes the most sense for them to move in with you." I heard the words. I understood the words. I sat with them for a full 5 seconds before I said, "I'm sorry?" "You have 3 bedrooms," she said. "It's just you. They have 2 children. You have the space." "It's my house," I said. "And family helps family," she said. There it was. The phrase I had heard approximately 8,000 times in my life, almost always directed at me. Almost always meaning you have something someone else needs, and you should give it to them. I looked at my sister. She was still looking at her plate. She wasn't eating. "Did you know about this?" I asked her. She lifted her eyes to mine. "Mom brought it up," she said quietly. "We haven't, it's not decided." "It's not even a question," I said. "It's my house. I didn't buy it to be a solution to someone else's lease problem." My mother's expression shifted. "Nobody is saying you owe them anything." "That's exactly what you're saying," I said. My dad stepped in. "We're asking you to think about your family." "I think about my family all the time," I said. "I've never asked any of you for anything. Not once. I worked and I saved and I built something for myself, and I would really appreciate it if you could just be happy for me, instead of immediately trying to figure out how to use it." There was a long silence. My sister's youngest knocked over a cup of juice, and everyone moved to deal with it, and the moment broke apart into chaos. And by the time things settled down again, the conversation had moved on to surface-level topics, and we all ate in that particular strained quiet that comes when a family has just had a fight they're all pretending they didn't have. I drove home that night and sat in my driveway for a long time before I went inside. I thought they would let it go. That was my first mistake. 2 weeks later, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. "I talked to a family counselor," she said, which was not how I expected the call to begin. She said that in situations where one family member has more resources, it's natural for the family to look to that person. "Mom," I said, "and that the key is communication." "Mom, and we'd like to have another dinner." "No," I said. She paused. "Excuse me?" "No," I said again. "I'm not coming to another dinner where you try to talk me into sharing my house. The answer is no." It was no at Sunday dinner, and it's still no, and it's going to be no every time anyone asks me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm very disappointed in you." "I know," I said. "I love you. I'll talk to you later." I hung up. My hands were shaking a little, not from fear, from the effort of holding a boundary I'd never held before with this particular kind of steadiness. It felt like using a muscle I hadn't known I had. But it wasn't over. What I didn't know, what I found out the following Saturday, was that while I'd been having that phone call with my mom, my cousin had given my parents a copy of my house key. I don't know exactly how it happened. The best I can piece together is that when he processed my closing paperwork, he had noted information about the lockbox code that the sellers had used during showings. The sellers had changed the locks after closing and given me 2 keys. But the new lockbox code was something my cousins apparently knew, and he passed it to my parents as some kind of gesture of helpfulness. I found out because I came home from the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, and my parents' car was in my driveway, and the front door was unlocked. I stood on the porch for a moment, grocery bags in both hands, looking at my open door, and felt a cold, specific kind of anger move through me. I walked in. My mother was in my kitchen. She was looking in my cabinets. My dad was in the living room. looking around at the space with the evaluating expression of someone measuring square footage in their head. "What are you doing?" I said. My mother turned around with no visible embarrassment. "We came to see the house," she said. "You never gave us a tour." "You need to leave," I said. "We're your parents," my dad said. "You entered my home without my permission," I said. "You need to leave. Right now." My dad looked like he wanted to argue. My mother set down the cabinet door she was holding and walked past me toward the front door. She paused in the doorway. "There's plenty of room," she said. "I just wanted you to see that." "Get out of my house," I said. They left. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that. Then I called a locksmith. Then I called my best friend, who talked me down from the ceiling. And then, after I'd calmed down enough to think clearly, I called a lawyer. I had been connected with a real estate attorney during the closing process, and she had given me her card and said the usual things about reaching out if I ever had questions. I reached out. I explained what had happened, the unauthorized entry, the lockbox situation, my cousin's role. She listened carefully. "Your cousin works at the title company that handled your closing," she said. "Yes," I said. "And he passed private access information about your property to third parties without your consent?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant breach," she said. "Potentially a violation of title company ethics regulations and possibly state law, depending on how that information was obtained and transmitted. I'd recommend we put together a formal complaint to the title company and to the state licensing board." "What about the unauthorized entry?" "That's criminal trespass under your state's law," she said. "You have a right to report it to the police. Whether you want to do that with your parents is a decision only you can make, but I want you to know it is an option." I thought about it for a long time. I decided not to file a police report against my parents. Not because what they did was okay. It wasn't, but because I knew what I needed wasn't a court case against my mom and dad. What I needed was for this to stop. What I did do was file a formal complaint against my son's title company. I documented everything I could reconstruct about the timeline. My attorney sent a formal letter to the company's compliance department. 2 weeks after that, my cousin called me. He was not apologetic exactly. He said he hadn't thought it would be a big deal. He said he was just trying to help the family. He said I was making things difficult for everyone. "I have one question," I said. "Did your company know what you did?" He didn't say anything. "Because they do now," I said. He hung up. I found out later, through my aunt who called to tell me I was being vindictive, that my cousin was put on administrative leave while the company investigated. I don't know what ultimately happened with his employment. I didn't ask. My aunt's call was the beginning of a broader family mobilization that I had not anticipated. Over the next 3 weeks, I received calls from 2 of my mom's siblings, one of my dad's brothers, and a neighbor who had known my family for 20 years and felt it was appropriate to weigh in. They all said versions of the same things. That family helps family. That I had more than I needed. That my sister's kids deserved stability. That I was being cold and selfish and that I would regret this. I didn't answer most of the calls. The ones I did answer, I said the same thing. "My house is not available for anyone to live in. This conversation is over, and if the calls continue, I will be limiting contact with whoever is calling." The family dinner they called. Not optional, my aunt said. Mandatory for all family members. I did not attend. My mother left a voicemail that said she was deeply hurt by my absence and that she hoped I would come to my senses. I listened to it twice. I didn't call back. Here's the thing about holding a boundary with people who have never seen you hold one before. The first few weeks are the hardest. They're not used to it, and they respond with escalation, because escalation has always worked before. They dial up the guilt. They loop in reinforcements. They reframe your no as something you said wrong, or something you'll eventually change, or proof that there's something wrong with you, rather than proof that you meant what you said. And then, eventually, when the nose doesn't move, something shifts. It's not that they accept it right away, but the escalation starts to cost them more than it's costing you, and the calls taper off, and the mandatory dinners stop being called, and you start to exist in this strange new quiet where you realize that what you were so afraid of, losing your family, being cut off, being the bad guy forever, is not as catastrophic as the years of living without any limit had been. My sister called me in January, not to relitigate anything. She called to tell me that she and her husband had found a rental in a town about 20 minutes from my parents, a 3-bedroom that was within their budget if they made some changes. She sounded tired. She sounded like someone who had been having a very hard few months. "I'm sorry," she said. "About the dinner. About all of it. I wasn't going to force anything on you. I want you to know that." "I know," I said, and I believed her. My sister isn't malicious. She's just someone who has spent a long time being managed by our parents just like I was, and she ended up on the other side of the same dynamic. "Your house sounds really nice," she said. "Mom mentioned the oak tree in the backyard. It's enormous," I said. "You'd love it." "Maybe I can see it sometime," she said. "Maybe," I said, and I meant it. My cousin's situation I heard about secondhand. The title company completed their internal review. He wasn't fired. At least not that I know of, but he was formally reprimanded and required to complete ethics training, and the information I'd been told was that his access to certain systems had been restricted. Whether that's justice, I'm not sure. It was at least acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. I changed my locks the day after my parents walked into my house. I also installed a video doorbell and a camera over the garage. Not because I live in fear, but because I live in my house, and my house is mine and I get to decide who enters it and when. In February, I painted the living room, a deep sage green that I had been thinking about for months. My best friend came over and helped, and we ordered Thai food and ate it on the floor because I still didn't have a couch yet, and she asked me if I regretted any of it. I thought about it honestly. The fallout, the cousin situation, the relatives who had called to tell me I was cold, the mother who had said she was disappointed, the sister who had moved into a rental instead of my second bedroom, all of it. "No," I said. She nodded like she already knew the answer. The couch arrived 2 weeks later. I assembled it myself, which took 3 hours and the full range of language I typically reserve for special occasions. But I got it done and I sat down on it and looked at my sage green walls and my kitchen, where nobody had ever walked in without my permission since, and I thought about the version of me who had sat on this floor with a bottle of sparkling water on closing day. She didn't know what was coming, but she made the right call. My parents and I talk, not as often as before, and not about the house unless I bring it up. My mom still occasionally says something that slides sideways into that old territory. A comment about how much space I have, a passing remark about my sister's new rent, and I redirect it, and she lets me redirect it, and we keep moving. It's not the relationship I thought we had, but it might be the one we actually have, and I'm finding that knowing the difference and choosing to stay in it with my eyes open is better than pretending. The oak tree in my backyard is doing fine. It dropped most of its leaves in December, and for a few weeks it just stood there looking skeletal and a little lonely, but by March it had started coming back. Small green buds on every branch, patient and determined and entirely unbothered by the winter it had just come through. I sat under it one evening with a glass of wine and watched the light change, and I didn't think about family dynamics or property rights or ethics violations or any of it. I just sat in my yard, in my house, in my life, and I let it be enough.